right. Well, now we move on to the mountain men. We move on from the lowlanders to the guys who started their wineries on hillsides. And God knows, they're interesting characters, to say the least. We have, to start with, Jay Heminway. You know his winery. It's green and red. Don't know quite why it's green and red. It could be purple and blue, but apparently not. Jay, why is it green and red?
The soils are primarily a volcanic soil, decomposed. Volcanic soils, chert, decomposed. A vein of serpentine runs through the property, hence green and red.
Green and red. There you go. So, Jay, you're not exactly from Lodi. You grew up someplace else. You grew up in the place where there's lots of agriculture. Yeah, in Central Park, right?
Yeah, in New York.
In New York. So you grew up in New York City, and you took advantage of a relationship, I understand, that got you to France. Well, not to mention your intellect, I think, got you there too. But tell us about that.
Well, I spent my junior year in France, and
Mic closer to your mouth.
during the summer, I worked at Château Lescombe in Bordeaux for the entire summer, and was tasting the '59 vintage.
Not bad.
Not bad is right. And that kind of hooked me, so to speak.
So, what did you study when you were in France? I mean, you were there not just to work at Le Chine. That just happened to be a bonus. You got to hang out with those pretty vineyardists who were picking grapes. But you were there for other reasons.
I was. This was my junior year. I was a French major, and everything tied together.
French literature and all that. And then you got back, and you didn't practice French literature. You found this small little abode that sold wine in New York. What was that?
That was actually after I'd graduated from college and sold wine at Sherry Lehman's, New York City. That was a great experience. They specialized in Bordeaux varieties. Got a chance to taste some very exotic wines as well. And that combination of the two, working for Le Chine and working at Sherry Lehman's, started me down a path, so to speak.
Yeah, but it's funny that the path. So he's tasting great Bordeaux's. He's working at Sherry Lehman, where they sell some of the greatest ones in the world. And he comes to California, and you work on a graduate degree. Is that right, in California?
Yeah, I started at Berkeley with a majoring in a master's in sculpture, in fine arts. Went to Italy for a year on a Fulbright, continuing to do sculpture, returned to California, and moved to Napa.
Moved to Napa. Like it was almost like you were a back to lander. I mean, it was like, I'm getting out of the city, I'm going to the country.
You got it.
And it wasn't, and so instead of planting, like Cabernet and making Bordeaux, you found something that inspired you even more than those wines. And there was something very California about your first, true wine love.
I tasted a lot of Cabernets that were being made. A lot of Zinfandel was being poured out. Jim Leiter was the farm advisor at the time, and he said this is where Zinfandel started, in this part of Napa, and I'm not sure if that's totally accurate, but I tasted two wines. They were both 68s, like the Joe Swan wine that inspired you.
Great vintage for Zinfandel.
And this was a Mayacamas. They don't make Zinfandel there much anymore. And some from the Deaver Vineyard, made by Sutterholm back then. That was before the white Zinfandel era. Yep. And they were, in my estimation, equal to, if not superior to, Cabernets being made at the time.
There you go. So you went to the next step, and you planted Zinfandel. So what did you plant, and how did you approach that, and what kind of budwood did you use? I mean, you didn't start with an old vineyard. You basically started from scratch.
Yes, I did, and literally did it pretty much ourselves. The Zinfandel we were only able to get was in 4-inch growing pots on their own roots. And we spent the first 2 years going around with a water truck watering daily to keep them alive. And that was the start of it. We have since had to replant because of phylloxera, and everything now is on several different rootstocks, not AXR. And pretty much vigorous rootstocks, and budwood we gathered, was from older vineyards in Geyserville and in other parts of Sonoma, and Lodi, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. You got some Pichetti Ranch as well, is that right?
Pichetti, Geyserville, and Bassini.
Mm-hmm.
And Hambrecht had some budwood.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what it was called before Hambrecht owned the ranch in Sonoma. And then in Lodi, a lot of own-rooted Zinfandel, which was very advantageous since it didn't run the risk of having a diseased rootstock.
So Jay basically was collecting clonal massal, which is what the French do. You know, we spend a lot of time these days, working, trying to find clean budwood and keeping it clean. We've got the scourge of the vineyard called red blotch these days, which makes Cabernet turn to green messes pretty quickly. So clonal massal is always a little bit risky, but it also, when done correctly and when matched to the soil, can be quite lovely. And I think, Jay, you've done a really lovely job with that. How your vines holding up after all these years?
Well, I can't say they're totally free of it. We got a little red blotch, a little leaf roll. That seems to be normal. We replant about 300 vines a season, and we try to keep the nutrition levels high. That seems to push back the red blotch, at least temporarily.
Your wines always have a real energy and nice flavor profile, good fruit in the center. I mean, some of the early wines I tasted from you were always a revelation. You've kind of thought about winemaking a lot because you did a lot of that work in Bordeaux. So when you started, did you start thinking about making claret, or what was your approach to this?
That's absolutely right. I was in Bordeaux. They were aging the wines for 3 years in barrel, picking at a low brix, relatively low, and so I set out to make a claret style, quote claret style, Zinfandel, and gradually have just creeped it up because of my feeling that flavor profiles required a little higher brix, a little higher ripeness, and with that, we've ended up, in the high 14s now, as opposed to, 13.2 and 13.1 alcohol wines.
So you end up using a little oak, some French, some American, I presume?
We started out using about 15% new, mainly American, and now we're kind of mixing it up. We're using about 20% new oak, and about 8% of that is French oak.
Right. So your wines always have this kind of brightness, and even though you've amped up the ripeness a bit and you're still in the mid-14s, they still have a very claret-like style. The whole process of making Zinfandel, because of its character, can allow you to exaggerate the character of the grape pretty significantly. But you've been really good about not doing that. Really, to maintain a consistent style with the complexity, how do you do that? And what's your thinking about that?
Well, the thing we've tried to avoid almost from the very beginning, Zinfandel being a very thin-skinned variety, will tend to shrivel at harvest, particularly in warm harvests. And so in order to avoid that, we've relied on micro irrigation at or near harvest, and we've tried to eliminate as much of the raisin character that you can get from Zinfandel. There's a certain amount of that happens no matter what you do. We've recently gone, for the last 3 vintages, to a double sorting system whereby raisins, shot berries, and a lot of stems are removed. So it's pretty much just wonderful looking berries going into the fermenter.
And so you brought us 2 wines. Tell us about the wines.
97 was a ripe year, and I think it was one of the years we started, not 97, 2007. It was a ripe year. The wines, 97, this is all from the Tip Top, which is a vineyard we planted high elevation, planted in the mid-90s. So relatively young vines. I would say they're 10 years old, and they achieved lusciousness. And so I thought it would be interesting to compare it with the 14, 7 years apart.
Same vineyard, 7 years apart, older vines. Do you see a difference?
It's hard to say, I mean, how the 14 will evolve, but I think it'll be somewhat similar, maybe not quite as ripe flavors. Mm-hmm. I see it as being a little bit more of a delicate vintage. Not as delicate as the 13, which was a very structured vintage in our growing conditions. And, but I think it'll evolve quite nicely.
Great. Jay, thank you very much. Lovely wines, very, very pretty, very wines of elevation. Really appreciate it. Thank you.